Hi everyone, my name is Vanessa Valiuco, and welcome to Personal Pans, conversations about belief, transformation, and all the weird and wonderful things we experience. Tonight's episode is with Jeremy Puma, who, aside from being one-third of Liminal Earth, has also written and published multiple books about the Gnostics, which only came up in this conversation. We, of course, talked about Gnosticism, about the appeal of tradition and the need to reconcile with problematic people within tradition. We also talked about the universe as a trickster, and of course we talked about Liminal Earth and WUFO. This conversation was an absolute delight, and I hope you enjoy it as well.
And I think a lot of it also can come down to, so I've been talking with a friend of mine. I don't know if you know or interact in any way with Yul Aramchek, the Patanoiac on Twitter.
I don't think so, no.
He's a great guy. He does
Cool.
he does a series on tarot on Substack that is absolutely a must read. It is
Oh,
amazing.
awesome. Yes.
His whole approach to tarot, he's creating like a tarot of reality, basically, by like finding tarot symbolism in his surroundings and take it. So anyhow, brilliant person. I actually on my Twitter, I just retweeted a thread of his that was he posted about this whole situation.
Oh, fantastic.
It's really interesting.
Yes.
And his whole thing is like the first thing he said that's like yes is that like one of the biggest warning signs to look for is this sort of like rejection of modernity, like this call to return to traditionalism. Like that
Yes.
is, you know, it's a little different than being like just kind of conservative about stuff, but there's this sense that like if you are a traditionalist, like you know, the Julius Evola types, that, you know, rejection of modernity, that somehow that's like radical, that like, you know, you're anti-woke if you're doing that. But the thing is that like I always think to myself, like I always think about it in terms of plants because I'm a plant person.
I love it. Yes.
It's like, what is the soil like that this tree is growing from, right?
Yes.
What is the soil like? And if there's shit in the soil that's bad for the plant, then you eat the fruit from the plant, then you're, you know.
Yes.
And a lot of these sort of like traditions, so I'm just rambling here, feel free to
My brain is tingling. Please continue. Yes.
So in my background, for a very, very long time, for you know, at least a decade, was actually in Gnostic philosophy and Gnostic thought.
Amazing.
And
Yes.
I've like, there's a couple, I have some books out on it, and it was, you know, sort of my course of study throughout university, and then the following decade, we had like the only online Gnostic forum for a while called the Palm Tree Garden, and this is all like internet prehistory.
Yeah.
And a lot of that at the time was sort of so there's like academic study of Gnosticism, which is focused on what those Gnostics actually said and produced and did.
Yes.
But then there's this whole like 19th century like Theosophical Society interpretation of Gnosticism based on 19th century scholarship, most of which has been thoroughly discredited since then.
Yes.
And is like rife with like racialism and abuse and you know, all that stuff. And eventually like the 19th century sort of neo-Gnostic French Reconstruction like Theosophical Society branch basically just won. Like I can't, like that whole community to me is like, with some very notable exceptions, but for the most part, like I had to leave because it was just too much, because you know, you have these characters involved in like, so C.W. Ledbetter, like, are you familiar with that guy?
I'm not, no.
So he's like, he was a big theosophist, and you know, he hung out with Annie Besant and those guys, and he was one of the guys who discovered Krishnamurti and tried to make him
Yes.
savior. A lot of colonialism, a lot of like really bizarre, But
Yes.
he was, and I don't say this lightly because it's out there, he was grooming young boys sexually, and that's never mentioned. Like, so many of these people were like questionably, like, I mean, gosh, Crowley, like, he was a terrible person. He was like
Yes.
a really terrible person.
Yes.
And I think you can have terrible people in your um tradition and still find value in that tradition, but you absolutely need to constantly apologize and call out. I mean, not necessarily apologize, but you constantly have to make people aware. I understand that there are racist, racialist, like neo-fascist
Mhm.
aspects of this tradition, and I reject that.
Yes.
I'm not
Yes.
rejecting traditionalism, and I'm not rejecting modernity, but I'm rejecting like the shitty parts of this system,
Yes.
you know?
Yes.
And if you can't do that, then you're causing trouble. So
I, I have so many thoughts. It's so funny. When I interviewed Bex, she was also writing. And so I'm like, that's a good ADD trick. Like, I'm gonna write this down.
totally.
Because I have a couple different thoughts. One, so Elaine Pagels to me is like the Gnosticism person, right? Because it's modern scholarship. It's looking at, what do we know from the texts, right?
Right.
The actual text that we have found and recovered and continue to find. To the idea of, first of all, the idea of traditionalism in any kind of sense is usually this reconstructed nonsense, right? So much. There's a book called The Way We Never Were that addresses like Republican conservative drive to kind of go back towards this like 1950s utopian ideal that they have in their head, and the author completely deconstructs why none of that ever existed. None of that existed in that time period, and our ideas of this idealized time are just like taken from all these different areas and time periods and fused together. There was no tradition to go back to. There was no it's a constructed history, right? And that is used for political means in order to create some grand narrative and kind of get people on board with all of this. Three, this idea that one of the things that I love is that Disney has started putting the kind of disclaimers essentially in front of racist cartoons, and to me that's such a great way to address it. I have a friend who also loves the writings of H.P. Lovecraft, but he is the first person to talk about what a horrible person he was.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So you can engage with, I think, like problematic content or problematic creators. I hate even using the word problematic, but if there's some sort of discomfort or something, these bad beliefs kind of people have had, I think there's a way to engage with that, as long as you're also addressing, hey, this person was terrible. They had these horrible racist beliefs. It comes through in their work. They were an anti-Semite. Like, you have to be able to have that in your head, because I see too many people apologizing for bad behavior because they like that person's work so much. It's like, no, you can enjoy the work. You can despise the person. It's totally cool. Like,
absolutely. Yeah.
Yes. And I think you need to, in order to have authentic conversations about the work, and work that is, and again, challenging, right? The fact that someone was grooming young boys and that is erased, like, how does that help anyone?
Yeah.
Anyone.
Well,
yeah.
And the thing is that this guy founded the Liberal Catholic Church, which is this sort of independent bishop group, and there are so many like modern esoteric orders that sprang out of that. Like, so many, like almost all of them kind of sprang out from this sort of movement, this sort of like Theosophical Society movement, and you never hear about any of that. And it's like, talk about it. Talk about it.
Thank you.
say it. You don't have to stop change. You don't have to stop believing what you believe, unless you're a fascist. But
right.
Talk about it and be
Yeah.
honest and be like, and then the thing with Gnosticism, to get back to that. So Elaine Pagels is like often like the gateway drug for people who are getting into Gnosticism.
Yeah, totally.
And unfortunately, a lot of what she has written has since been kind of found not to necessarily be
Really?
like straight up. So there's a book by a guy called Michael Williams called
Yes.
Rethinking Gnosticism. And
Okay.
if you're into Gnosticism, like if you read it, it'll blow your mind, because his basic premise is there was no Gnosticism.
Oh, really?
There were Gnostics. There was not a Gnostic singular tradition that can be traced to now. So it's just like heathenism, like Norse heathenism or Druidry.
Yes.
There's not a tradition, like an actual tradition that started back then and came to now.
Yes.
And so it's like the same thing. It's like and that was one of the differences that I ended up having with a lot of like sort of the modern Gnostic movements, is that they would insist that there was this tradition that could be traced back to 200 BC, even before Christ, and it was Gnosticism, and all of these texts were from that tradition and could be utilized as like a way of life. And that is not historically true. It's not. I mean, it's sort of like the neo-Druidry tradition in the 19th century. Like, that's not the case. Now, does that mean that you shouldn't practice that? No, that doesn't mean that at all. It's just like, in neo-pagans who are reconstructionists, who are open about it, like, that's cool. Totally. Say, look, I'm very inspired spiritually by these writings, the Gnostics, and I like to it gives me spiritual satisfaction to create a myth in which I am part of this community or tradition of people who existed back then. But historically speaking, there is no evidence that that's actually the case.
Yes.
If you say that, then I'm like, okay, cool. Like, that's awesome. Yes. But if you're insisting that a tradition exists that doesn't exist, like back to the Republicans and their 1950s stuff, that's where there's a problem. That's like,
right. Well, and also, again, I keep thinking about that metaphor of the soil and what is in the soil and what comes from the fruit if the soil is poisoned, and I'm also thinking about how, again, I'm a chaos magician. I don't care if something is 500 years old, 5,000 years old, or 5 minutes old. Like, does it work? Great. Does it resonate with me on an emotional level? Great. That's where the value is, Is it helpful? Again, is it empowering for people? So I've always found, and maybe it's because I'm an Aquarius, like I really don't know, but I always have found it strange when people only see value in something that is traditional, in some that, I've traced my lineage back. It's like, I'm the only person in my family that's a witch, like I'm cool with that. Like, and I don't think that, I don't know. I find it strange, that appeal to tradition. It's like, you're doing something that's breaking with tradition anyway. Do you need to like have this long lineage? Like, again, for me, magic is a system of personal empowerment. Okay, fine. So something happened however many years ago. What's happening right now? What are you doing right now? What can you take from all these different traditions and kind of syncretically build your own thing? Like that again, right? Like, okay, rotate the soil out, like plant different things. Get some rotator crops in there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You got to add compost in there, man.
That's it. Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
And which isn't to say though that there aren't like actual traditions. Like, I don't want to.
Oh, yes.
I mean, obviously you and I both would agree on that. Like, I'm not, but it's, I think there's also, one of the things at Liminal Earth that we're really trying hard to do as best we can. And, of course, as like white folks, we're never going to be 100% able to do it,
Yeah.
is to avoid appropriation, like as much as possible. And if there's an actual tradition, like we don't want to appropriate from it at all.
Yeah.
So like this is one of the reasons why so like the Oracle of the Hypogeum, our deck, our Oracle deck, like those symbols are not from a tradition,
Yes.
but they're based on ancient quatria, right? Because we believe that traditions can also have power as myth.
Yes.
And
Yes.
myth is like, my favorite definition of myth is that like myth is a story that gives someone's life meaning.
Yeah.
That you can use to find meaning. And so your tradition, if you're finding meaning from that, like, is a myth, and it can be.
Yes.
If you admit to that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Again, there is power everywhere. And I talked about this with my friend Emmy on the podcast. Like, don't take what isn't yours, like,
Yeah.
don't, it's especially like this, it's like colonization in these spaces as well. It's like, don't, there's so much else out there. Figure, like what is yours? What makes more sense for you to engage with,
Right.
like, and again, I think it's important to read about different, if you're interested in something, read about different traditions, but don't like suddenly take it and you're like, well, this is mine now. It's like,
right.
Please don't.
Yeah.
It's a little thing you can do ultimately that is like leaves a good impact, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Interesting times.
I know. Wild times. But I think that's why I appreciate, again, everything that you're doing at Liminal Earth, because it's everything that like jives with me, right? Curiosity, playfulness, and of course now I'm staring because I just got a new plant stand that I've been migrating all my plants onto. It's like, let's play with plants.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like exploration in new ways, right? It's not just, again, it's not like, okay, here are static methods of communication or engaging with the strange or whatever the phenomena is. It's like, okay, let's come up with new things. Maybe there is something here that hasn't been explored yet. There's value in that.
And being playful, like it's so important to us to be playful because, first of all, the phenomenon is playful. Period. Like if you don't see that, then you're missing out on something. You're missing out on a huge aspect of it.
Agreed. Yes.
It's playful. It's a trickster, and sometimes the jokes suck and they're like pranks that it's pulling on us, right? But sometimes the weirder you can be, the more it reacts to you. And so that's why so Garrett created, I don't know if you saw any of the live from last night or anything.
I didn't know.
But so Garrett is our other friend on Liminal Earth. He created this way to create spirit boxes out of anything, like out of cut up. So any audio, you can do. So he did like the Christmas song Spirit Box, which was hilarious. And he's gonna do, so various movies that he's cut up. He did a Rodney Dangerfield spirit box for AP.
Oh my God. That's so good.
Well, the one we used last night during the WUFO session was from Mac and Me, which is like that terrible 80s ET ripoff.
Yes.
And so he was using like the cut up soundtrack to the Mac and Me movie, listening to it, doing an Estes session with like brain machine glasses on, like the ones that our friend Jason made. And it seems ridiculous, but like the answers that you were getting were really like spot on. And so why wouldn't they be, right? I mean,
right.
Yeah.
Right. It's funny because when I talked with Bex was talking to me about like different types of mushrooms and how they communicate with trees. And like some are like, hey, what nutrients do you need to like help them? And others are like, hey, what do you need to like take, And it's not from a moral system, it's just nature, right? And to me, the universe is this very amoral trickster. And so it's like, how do you want to play? That is how it will play with you, right? And so I do think like if you're more of like a doom and gloom and kind of like a you know, like those grumblecore edgelords. I think that's how the universe plays with you. And I think if
Right.
you have a light heart and you're just like, I'm gonna I'm gonna have the Mac and Me soundtrack on brain glasses. It's like, cool, I can do this.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There's no, like, all of our expectations are very this is part and parcel to get into like liminal ecology, the idea that, you know, we kind of have been promoting, that like all of our expectations and studies of this kind of stuff um are very anthropocentric, basically. And to assume that like the phenomena is contacting us on our terms is completely like, forget it. I mean, John Tenney's been talking about this stuff for decades. Like, he deserves a lot of credit for bringing a lot of this, I think, into the community at large. But you know, stuff like we were thinking about last night, like it's kind of presumptuous to think that like the UFO phenomena, for example, is like human centric.
Yes. Right.
Like, why would these beings or entities or whatever they are just study us? You know, like, I put something up about it that said, you know, it's like you're a chimp being studied by Jane Goodall, and you think humans are only fascinated by chimps. Right? But you know, humans also study the ocean. We study plants. We study
everything.
Weather, we study everything. You know.
Yeah.
And our interest in chimps is like, I mean, I think Jane Goodall is amazing, and I think chimps are interesting, but I'm not going to go to Rwanda and hang out with, you know, that's not my level of interest. So why would I think that some UFO entity might only be interested in humans? Like, they might be interested in microorganisms. Like, I was thinking about that in terms of cattle mutilation. Like, why are they taking those particular parts? Like, are there microbes that are living in those parts that we don't really get? And then that leads to this is just sort of, you know, the brain working, that liminal ecology way of thinking of things. There's this association between salt and entities of kinds, you know. Fairies, like the Fae, they don't like salt. You know, you put a salt circle around you to protect you when you're doing certain spell work and magic. And then the pancakes that Joe Simonton got from the aliens.
Oh, right.
They analyzed that and they have no salt at all. So the other thing I was thinking is, like, when you're making a fermentation, right, in your kitchen, like you're making sauerkraut, right? You add salt a little bit in the proper ratio, because salt actually doesn't allow the non-beneficial microorganisms to thrive. So if you add salt to, if you're making sauerkraut, you put in salt, because that way only the lactobacillus and those organisms that are beneficial to us will survive, and the salt ones won't. So is there a relationship there between the microorganisms reacting to the salt in sauerkraut and these other entities like having a bad reaction to salt? Like, are they dealing with some other kind of microorganisms? Are there microorganisms that are beneficial to them that are not to us? And that's why they don't like salt? And I don't know, it's just like, and you know, Chicago, somebody mentioned last night, Chicago, Morton, the Morton Fault used to have salt mines all the way under Chicago. Like, and so we were just talking about that as something that's interesting too.
Of course.
And then then that leads back to the whole thing about the Joe Simonton space pancakes. Like, those aliens were not there to see Joe. They were not there to hang out with him at all. Like, they just wanted like some water and to fix their ship or whatever, and then just take off.
And then they're out. Yeah, exactly.
And the more you start looking at these cases, and I'm sure like Rob Christofferson probably has like a whole mental database of cases like this where they're not human centric. They're not looking at us. Like there's one that we were talking about that happened here in Washington State where it was near Mount Rainier, and a group of loggers, they saw an elk being sucked up into a UFO, and it just flew. And like they just an elk. Like what's going on there? Like they're not always just interested in us.
Right. I love this for so many reasons. First of all, Mortellus was talking to me about salt, and in terms of magical practice, totally like blew my mind, changed the course of my practice.
Mm-hmm.
There is something to salt. I don't know what it is. There's something going on with salt. Mm-hmm. But I love this idea of, again, decentralizing the human experience in terms of the phenomena, and moving past your own narcissism of, well, clearly this is all about me, or this is all about us, and just looking at patterns of behavior, and looking at, okay, what is happening in these UFO encounters, or encounters with the Fae, and all of that, and thinking like, okay, well, let's just look at, again, I'm very data driven. Let's look at what the phenomena is doing, right? Or what people are seeing the phenomena do. Mm-hmm. And rather than interpreting it immediately through the lens of, they're here to study us, they're here to think about, figure out what we're doing, even that they give a shit about us, because they might not. Mm-hmm. And that's totally fine.
Yeah.
Like it's so much, again, I think it leads more to that playful exploration, rather than being stagnant in trying to interpret all of the data through the lens of, well, clearly this has some greater meaning to us. Again, I always talk about, like, where we try to intellectualize stuff, and that's because we're trapped in these three-dimensional meat sacks, a linear time dimension. We're adapted to operate and engage in the world in a certain way. And that means that any logical interpretation we have over whatever is happening, that is limited by the constructions of our own intelligences. There could be something else completely outside the realm of comprehension that is directing all of this. And you're only going to be able to see that, or kind of see little glimpses of things, if you step back and say, I'm not the center of the universe here. I'm maybe not even the center of the earth. Like, I just, what's here? What can I learn from this? Right? Is this showing me a glimpse of something else, like of some greater reality?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And it's just like, when you start looking at it that way, you start seeing things differently. And it comes again back to like what we talk about with plants. And I don't know if you and Bex had talked about this yet, but the idea of plant awareness as being like a different way of seeing, which, is one of the there's the Liminal Spirit Oracle that we just put out. I don't know if you have a copy yet.
No, I have the Oracle.
We'll send you one.
Okay, cool.
The basic idea behind it is, like, we wanted to have a system where you could like walk outside and just like pick up random elements of your yard or area, like rocks or twigs or berries or flowers or whatever, and use those components of your own surroundings to communicate with like a liminal spirit that would allow you to perform divination, act in an oracular fashion.
Oh, I love that.
And so what you do is, you take these components of your yard. I might pick up like 20 pebbles or flower petals, or, a mix of all of that. And then you do, it's casting lots essentially. Because, 1 and 0 are the simplest human methods of coming up with yes and no. So it's casting lots, similar to geomancy, and you create a sigil of 5 rows, and each sigil represents some item in the landscape. So it could be flower, it could be a cloud, it could be water. There are various levels of readings you can do. You can do a simple one where you just cast 1 sigil. But if you're going to do it like sort of the full way, like the full reading, you do 1 for each of the cardinal directions, and then 1 for yourself as well. The one that you cast for yourself, you're allowed to change, because you're part of the community. So you can change one of the rows if you're like, I'm going to change that from 2 to 1. The other ones, each direction, you are charged with walking in that direction until you find an example of whatever that sigil represents.
Yes.
So if you generate flower in the north would represent things that are like obstructing or pushing back on what your intended goal is. If you get flower, then you would walk, and then if the first, not necessarily the first flower you saw, but the flower that made you go, that's the one, your intuitive understanding, like, oh, that's the flower that this is referring to.
Yeah.
Then you analyze the folklore and uses of that flower, and that gives you your oracular reading.
Yes.
So if I find, like, say, a dandelion, I might think like, okay, what are, like, the dandelion is, it's a liver tonic, like it is pollinator friendly, it disperses like 1,000 seeds, only of like 5 of which are viable. Like these are meanings that you can use to interpret what's being told to you by your liminal spirit in your own environment. So it's this way to literally try to reconnect with your surroundings, and the more that you know about the plants and the community of entities around you, the clearer your reading is going to be. And so when you use this oracle, we're hoping we are actually going to encourage people to go out and learn about like the plants in their area, how they were used, the folklore, what they mean, how they could be mean to them, how they could be meaningful to you.
Yes.
And we're doing this in part because when you start learning plant identification, you start developing plant awareness. And it there are some people who call it plant blindness. We think that's a little too ableist. Like we don't really like that. So we call it plant awareness instead. But the general idea is that, like, most people, if you show them a picture of a lion on the savannah, they're like, oh, cool, a lion on the savannah. But we want to get it to a point where if you show somebody a lion on the savannah, you could be like, oh, cool, check out that acacia tree. And that the patterns in that grass that are growing next to the lions too, or that bare soil in front of it, like that is just as, like, you could be aware of that stuff when you're looking at pictures of it. And then when you start walking around outside, it's like you're putting on a pair of goggles, and now you have this like heads up display. It's like, doop doop, dandelion, I can use it for this and that, and maple tree, like that's got flowers that I can eat, and because once you got that down, then you also start getting the ability to see and understand and experience like liminal stuff too. So that if you go on like an investigation in like a haunted house, say, you're going to start noticing things because you're looking at it in a different way that other like investigators might not notice. It's like a new kind of awareness. So
and I love this for a couple of reasons. One, because I interviewed Kiki recently, and she was talking about how anything you can use for divination. And so I love that. Just like, oh yeah, you can use anything if it's meaningful to you. And then also, again, I talk a lot about alienation, and we are so alienated from nature, from the environment, from what's going on around us. And I love that idea of reconnecting with knowledge that we, again, I've been ragging on tradition, but like we used to have, we had to have knowledge of plant species and everything else going on around us because for food, first of all, and just being more embedded in that. But now that we've kind of, again, alienated ourselves from nature with concrete, it's so much harder to, I started getting into plants because I was sad. I'm like, I don't know what kind of tree this is. Like that's sad to me that I can walk around my neighborhood and not know what any of the trees are. I just wasn't raised to pay attention to any of that. And but you can always learn. Yeah.
I do think though that there's something to the idea of the fact that a lot of times, like in the urban setting in particular, like it's easy to go out and say like, let's go explore nature if, you know, you're a half-hour drive from the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
But I think in an urban setting, it's useful too for me, or it's been useful for me to think about it as like nature isn't something you go to. It's something
Mm-hmm.
that you participate in.
Mm-hmm.
And so even in an urban setting, like you don't need to go someplace to experience like it's you're a part of it there. And you know, like when we're talking about the Liminal Spirit Oracle, that's why you get to make a change to the sigil that you're creating to represent you if you want to, because you're part of that spirit, you're part of that community, you're not something separate from it. And that actually allows you even more insight into like and confidence in like the results that you get, I think.
Yeah,
Is like we're not,
absolutely.
you know, nature is not it's not something other, you know, we don't have to go on a vacation to be in nature. Like you could and I don't care where you are, you could be in downtown Chicago. I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, and step outside and it's there. Like it's there. You just need to like
Yes.
develop the ability to put on those goggles. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, and again, I like that because it's this, again, personal empowerment, and giving people skills, and also like, again, that awareness of you're not separate from something, you're part of it, right? And it's there. You don't have to find it. Like I'm
Mhm.
lucky because I live pretty close to Lake Michigan, so I can like walk to the lake. But there's also all sorts of everything going on outside, like birds and trees and bugs, and it's all there. It's
Yeah.
just learning to clue in, you know,
Mhm.
like Terminator vision, but in a good way, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Or those sunglasses from They Live, but
Oh,
yeah.
yes.
But in the other direction.
Exactly right. I like that one because it's like a little more hopeful too, right?
It
I'm
is.
just
That's
like,
true.
boom, hey, look, plants and cool things. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So we've been talking about liminal ecology, but I'd also like to talk about WUFO a little bit, because I love it. I
Yeah.
love it. Again, talking in terms of play and engagement,
Mhm.
you know, getting people to work on little altars and to communicate with UFOs and also like water. How did this develop?
Yeah. So actually we can attribute it to Madeline Kelly.
Mhm.
They mentioned it on Twitter that like John Keel had said, you know, Wednesdays at 10 o'clock in one of his
Mhm.
books. And I honestly I can't remember which one. It might have been Mothman Prophecies, but
Yeah.
anyhow, they mentioned that on Twitter, and we were like, well, then why aren't we all going outside and looking around for UFOs at that time? And then it just kind of was like, boop, okay, we're gonna do it.
Love it.
So like I think it was like 2 days worth of um, chatting about how best to do it, and like Bex designed punch cards for us, and um,
Mhm.
yeah, and then it just kind of took off because it's such an easy idea, like, and anybody can do it, and that's one of the things we always want to try and do is make it as accessible
Mhm.
as possible to anyone, which is why we also provide on the site like things you can do if you can't go outside,
Yeah.
right? If there's some reason you can't go outside, and it doesn't matter what reason, like there's meditations, there's websites where you can actually look at like real shots of the sky,
Yeah.
and then also Madelin's doing the you know, the side quests, which you go out and you look for stars and constellations. And to me that's cool because like I mean everybody knows like the Big Dipper and Orion and stuff, but
Mhm.
now I know like Corvus
Right.
and you know
Mhm.
all the other stars, as you know, it's more of that sort of putting on a different kind of goggle.
Yes.
Um and then, you know, we were doing it live on TikTok for a while. Now we're doing it live on multiple platforms. Doing
Mhm.
it live on YouTube has been awesome, and we're having guests on now as well.
Yeah.
Um, and ultimately, the thing we like the most about it, and I know that Garrett and Bex would agree with me on this, is that every Wednesday there are people going outside around 10 o'clock at their time and just like being outside.
Mhm.
We have so many people who like they're seeing cool animals in their yard, or
Yeah.
you know, they're just like drinking a beer and looking up at the sky. and be just experiencing some quiet.
Mhm.
And sure, the more people that do this, the better. We're playing the odds that eventually one of those people is going to see a UFO.
Of course.
But it's almost become, I wouldn't say secondary. I mean, it is a UFO watch party. Like, we really want somebody to find a UFO. But the benefits from it are much more than that, I think, for most people who have started playing with us. Right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And it's cool. Like, people all over the world. Like, there's someone who in Australia who does it from Perth.
Amazing.
And
Yes.
it's like all these people are coming out. And we were just talking about it last night. Like, we never wanted it to become like a chore. Like, oh gosh, we've got to get on and do this, and and it has, like, we've done it for 15 weeks now, and
Oh my gosh.
I
Yes.
know, it's wild, and it only keeps getting bigger, and we're having more and more fun with it every single time. So
I love it.
yeah.
Well, and to me, again, like chaos magic, like the center to a magical working is like a light heart, right? And that sense of play. And I think that is infectious. Like people want to play, they want to feel engaged with things. And there's something really magical about knowing that there are people literally all over the world who are taking an hour out of their week and just sitting outside and looking at the skies and then reporting in, and then posting photos of the side quests and all of that, and just engaging, right? Like I think there's something very powerful about play and in liberating the human spirit. Like it's this incredible tool to just kind of get yourself out of any even just from like something as little as a rut to like the struggles of capitalism, right? Because you're just saying like, nope, I don't care, I'm taking an hour, I'm looking at the sky. Like
absolutely,
that's very powerful and very personally affirming.
Awesome.
And
then and then the things that there are some things that we do that I know some people in the some vocal people in certain online communities like are just like, oh, that's silly, like it's not serious. Like, I want to know if like UFOs actually exist. I don't want to do like, the idea that we have of like leaving out UFO water. Leave out water and like the UFOs will fly over it and be like moon water, or making snacks as an offering, pretzels, or making little UFO shrines and stuff like that. And I mean, they are kind of like silly, but they're also getting people thinking in ways that they don't usually think. And that is, maybe if enough people do it, we'll create some sort of beacon that the UFO actual entities will be attracted to.
Right. Well, and it's so hard for me in general because, like my boss is normal and I love talking to her about like bigotry and very serious people in the paranormal and occult fields, because she's just, because I'm like, it's like we're talking about Bigfoot and UFOs here, and people want to do the serious work. It's like, come on, like you can. And again, I think it goes into this kind of capitalist belief that like silliness and playfulness is not like good value, and so it's dismissed. Whereas, for me, there is this incredible liberatory power in play, in curiosity, in an exploration, in saying, I don't have answers. Let me look for more data. Let me see, let me have different approaches to whatever this thing is. Like, at the very least, I think personally, you're going to have more fun. And I think you're also going to get more interesting results, right? And again, these broader questions, because I'm always all over the place in terms of like, okay, is this just all us, like displaced psychic phenomena that is trying to call back to us? Are there actual aliens? Is it interdimensional, whatever? Like we're getting just three-dimensional cross sections of these multidimensional creatures. I don't know. I don't actually need to know. I don't care. If there's a way to communicate, if there's a way to engage, and it seems like there are, do that, right? I am results based. I am process based. Like okay, I don't know what this is, but something's happening. This is fun. Like let's try more of this and see what happens.
Yeah. Yeah, and make it fun. And I mean, I've seen people say like, well, we have fun. Like fun for us is like we go camping and look for Bigfoot. And it's like, first of all, sleeping in a tent is not fun. Okay, glamping or nothing for me. Period.
Solid.
And second of all, look, the world's ending. Like there's, we've got climate change happening. It's pretty intense. Like if you start getting into that, like there's not a lot of promising news in that area.
Yeah.
So go out and look for fucking spaceships. Like have fun, like enjoy yourself, spoil yourself. Like
right, exactly. Well, it's so funny because it's like the idea of like self-care gets thrown around a lot. And it's usually just some sort of like capitalist pampering that people are expected to do. Like real self-care is affirmation of the self, right? And that is in, all right, I'm gonna go stare at the stars, or I'm gonna pick up rocks, or I'm just gonna like look at the lake and having fun and playing and doing something that doesn't contribute to someone else's profit margins. Like that is incredibly powerful and authentic and beautiful. Why wouldn't you want to do more of that? Like, great. And like you said, again, between climate change and like the political situation, I'm just like, we're done. So let me enjoy as much of nature and the human experience that I get to have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On my terms.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Yep. Yeah. People always are like, oh, I wish the X-Files was real, or I wish, Twin Peaks was, well, I don't know. I don't know if I want Twin Peaks necessarily. Like some parts of it, okay. But like the X-Files, stuff like that, like, oh gosh. Well, like, then live your life as though it is.
Yeah, right?
Why not? Like, there's nothing that's stopping you from like finding your giant shrimp in the laundry room in your area and doing a deep dive on it and seeing what you can find. If nothing else, like it's fun.
And again, maybe I'm just wired this way, but like I love doing research on random things. I just love it. And people know that. And so they'll come to me and they'll be like, hey, could you look into this? I'm like, I'm going to drop everything and do this right now.
Yeah.
I think it's from like the dopamine of like finding information or like finding things that other people can't find. But there's also, again, it's so personally affirming to say like, I have a project, I can do this research, and I'm going to go out and try to find more information, because you are empowered. You develop these skills. If you start looking for things, then it helps you discern, is this a valid source of information? Is this maybe not quite as reliable?
Right.
You learn that through exploration and by testing and by moving forward. I mean, that's pretty awesome. Like,
yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Have you read Courtney's book yet, or do you have?
Not yet. No.
I have it, and it's so good. Like, it's anybody who is into the idea of like researching this stuff should totally have a copy of it.
I'm so grateful I have a copy of it. It's like on my to read stack. Yeah. And because it is, again, it was so great to talk with her, because she and I are very similarly minded in terms of information and analyzing information, collecting information, and understanding like there are reliable sources out there. You can find them, and it helps you evaluate. You can also like learn and evaluate and grow on your own, and you can find new things or like try your own experiments. Again, there's no harm in that. Like, just be very conscientious about like how you're collecting data and why. Like, keep a record. Again, nothing wrong with that. You get to have these fun little research projects on your own. Cool. Yeah. And then it's similar
in that way to like when you start, if you catch the bug of getting into plants, then that is another thing that like you can fall into research rabbit holes in. And it's amazing, like just finding the use. There's so much out there, and there's so much like indigenous wisdom when it comes to plants and how they're used, and and it's all out there, and you just have to research it respectfully and non-appropriatively.
Exactly.
Obviously. But you need to. But when you do that, and you get this, And here's the thing too, when it comes to like climate change, for example, I always thought like, what would solve climate change right now is if like everybody in the world all of a sudden became animists.
Yeah.
Right? Like if everybody all
Yes.
of a sudden was like, oh, that tree is a person. Like that tree is a person. And
Mhm.
this idea of, going out on these walks and learning about plants and animals and, all of the entities around you, like that is to me like an effective way to like personally fight the effects of climate change that we're seeing. And
Yeah.
there's a lot that we're finding too. We're finding in some of our researches into the experiences that we've had,
Mhm.
and this has come up at WUFO a few times too, is something about entities that are troubled or disturbed by our impact on
Oh.
waterways.
Mhm.
Like water treatment plants seem to have a lot of activity around them, we've noticed.
Interesting.
Bex there's a like a lake near her that is overly polluted and clogged, and there's been
Mhm.
some events like that. The place where the oranges show up, our mystery oranges,
Yeah.
it's called a riparian area, and there used to be a river there, but when the pioneers came in and
Mhm.
dredged it and opened a new ship canal and stuff, the river like vanished. And so now it's a riparian area, a riverbed. And that's where all
Yeah.
that weird high strangeness stuff is going on over there.
Mhm.
Um, we were talking to Alex last night, Bumpy. He was our guest on
Yeah.
WUFO.
Cool.
And he was talking about, I think it's called the Devil's Dam in LA. And it's where Jack
Mhm.
Parsons and
Oh,
those guys did all of their,
yes.
and L. Ron Hubbard and
Yeah,
did
yeah,
all of their stuff.
yeah.
It is a river that got drained. Like it's a dead river. It's a riparian area.
Yes.
And it was also a meeting place for local indigenous groups, which our local riparian area also was a meeting place for local indigenous groups. And
Interesting.
so there's all this energy around like, is what we're doing to, and I'm sure it's more than just water, but for some
Mhm.
reason that's what's presenting it to itself to us right now.
Right, right.
Like, is what we're doing to the water stirring up this activity in
Yes.
some way? And so
Yes.
if that's the case, then like I was reading today on some news site that they're in the middle of a mega drought in Southern California, and
Mhm.
Lake Mead is at its lowest point that it's ever been
Oh my God. Yes.
since like the 70s or something. Like, what is that dredging up? Like, what is
Yes.
that? So it's a bigger picture
Yes.
when you start looking at it that way. And
Yes.
yeah,
And it's one of those things too where it's like to me I don't care what term you put on it or word you put on it in terms of this phenomenon, but there is clearly something out in nature, whatever it is, right, that is reacting to things that happen. Again, this is like a silly thing, I think I've mentioned it before, but like when I started collecting plants during and taking care of plants during the pandemic, like a lot of people, and then one day there was this storm, and I'm like, I'm gonna go collect branches for wands, like these ADHD ideas that flit in and out of my brain. And so I just did a little like, kind of prayer spell like to the spirits, and I was like, hey, I'm gonna look for some stuff. It'd be really nice if you put some sticks in my path. And then I ended up finding these enormous branches that had been cast off these trees. And I really don't think I would have found those if I didn't have a relationship with plants, because the plants were like, oh, you more of us? Yeah, of course.
totally, yeah.
We'll help. you know? And
Yeah.
so to me too, like the fact that you're kind of clued into water right now, again, I think the phenomena shifts in how it communicates with us and how it plays with us. And so people kind of limit and look at it as just one thing, as opposed to like, okay, water is significant for a specific reason for you, right? Like that, those are the ways you need to look for it. For me, it's 100% plants. Like, and again, before 2 years ago, I probably like that would have done nothing for me. But now, because I've been taking care of and propagating these babies, like
Yeah.
I have relationships. So when I go out into the world, I have a different interaction with trees and the grass and all of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's hard not to see that, like, okay, our impact on the earth, and especially like, okay, there was a river here and it is not here anymore.
Right.
How many thousands of years of history that were just erased, and the earth is reacting to it. It's got to be a trauma.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the another thing that brings up too is that same area is full of coal mines.
Okay.
And that
Yeah.
comes up a lot in,
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
and it's another case where, we went in with these big machines and just, I mean, rivers disappear naturally. Like that's the
Sure.
case.
Yes.
Sure, rivers dry up as just part of the normal cycles of nature, but that's not what happened here.
That's it.
No.
And again, it's kind of like decentralizing, we're talking about this with UFOs, like decentralizing the human experience. Our perception of time has to be so much different than like an earth spirit or a water spirit, right? Because it's like, yes, of course, rivers can dry up over time, as opposed to like a couple years or a season and it's suddenly gone and it's never coming back. Like that has to be, again, trauma is like defined as something often that happens too quickly, right? Too quickly for us to process. That's got to be a trauma for the environment, like just from an energetic perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what else is interesting that I
Yeah.
just thought of because we were talking about anime.
Yes.
Is that like a lot of this river spirit stuff? Like you just have to watch Spirited Away.
Oh my God. Right.
The whole movie, like all it is, the entire movie of Spirited Away, the whole thing is about like river spirits. Like that's
river spirits, exactly. Oh my God, exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
I gotta rewatch that movie. I watched
Oh
it
my
like a
gosh.
couple years ago, but now I'm like, ugh, I don't need much of a prompting to watch anime, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Or like so you're one of the only other people I know who has seen like Mushishi.
Yes,
It's
exactly.
so good. Like
It's so good.
if people haven't seen this, it's on Hulu right now.
Mhm.
And it's like slow and quiet, but it's about these like spectral microorganisms who act in ways that humans can't comprehend. Like I just watched one where one of them had caused this black birthmark on a girl,
Mm.
and she had to write stories about other, like she had to write, like create a library, um and as she wrote with the ink, the black stuff in the birthmark would kind of vanish, but they were these living
Yes.
beings too, these entities. Like
Mhm.
so this is very hard to explain. Like this show is very hard to explain,
Right.
but yeah.
But I think taps into talking about like, okay, what if aliens are only here because of certain microbes, right?
Right.
What if like again, the idea of like mushrooms and the, how big mushrooms are, like, and how they're communicating with plants, like we could just exist to serve the mushrooms, right? Like when you like we don't know like what microorganisms. I did some research like a couple of years ago about like gut bacteria, and and essentially all the cues that the bacteria in our gut gives our brain in terms of what we eat, and even sometimes in behavior, like we are not as in control of certain things as we think. And I think it's important to have that humility about it. Like, all right, I could just be here for a total, like we have all of these, human centric sensibilities. Like it could all be wrong. It could all be
We're just giant farms walking around. Like we're just
basically.
pretty much. And if anybody's ever done it, I always try and recommend this to people who have never done it. Like the first successful batch of something fermented that you make. It could even be like kombucha or I like to do it with sauerkraut, but any sort of like lacto fermentation that you do. before anything else, like when you're like, when you're like, okay, this is finally ready, like take a shot of just the brine, because you're getting like billions of these little microorganisms in there.
Yes.
And pay attention to how you feel, because when I do that and really pay attention, I can like feel the energy of some kind. It's almost like a brain zap or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And after a while, like I'm kind of used to it now because I do it all the time, but like that first like shot of just the brine, and it's got to just be the liquid brine, because that's just like pure microorganism. Like,
yes. Yes.
It does something to you, like energetically, without getting too woo woo, but there's a palpable sensation that I can't describe, but that I really encourage anybody to try, because it's cool.
Of course.
It might not mean anything at all, but it's cool. So just do it.
Well, perfect. Again, experimentation. Why not? Right. And at the very least, I mean, again, I was raised on junk food, right? But when I start eating healthier, the physical reaction that I have, like your body is telling you like more of this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so at the very least, your body is like, oh, this is the good stuff and it's concentrated, like more of this, So just that, aside from any potential energetic exchange that is happening there too. Like, again, I got to start making sauerkraut again. I used to for a while.
It's true, yeah. Well, and that's another thing too, is when you make it yourself, you can't get this from store-bought stuff because you're not using the microorganisms that are in your environment. I mean, if you make it at home, you are interacting with microbes, like you're working with the microbes that live around you, and that are more simpatico to you. I mean, they're part of your environment already. So
that's it. Well, it's like that idea of eating local honey in order to build up a natural immunity to pollen and other allergens. There are processes in the environment around you that can help you operate through life if you work with it as opposed to it, right?
Totally.
Before I let you go, where can people find you? Where can people find Liminal Earth?
I can be found through Liminal Earth, basically.
Great.
I can get back. I had a personal site for a while, but I let it lapse because nothing was going on. But I need to toss something up again. But liminal.earth. Twitter, I am the main like Liminal Earth Twitter person. Bex does Instagram and Garrett does TikTok.
Oh, perfect.
No, it worked out really well.
Yeah.
So, Liminal Earth Twitter is a really good way to get in touch with me. I'm also at Mystery Harvest on Twitter. Those are pretty much the main ways to get in touch with me. Woofo.watch for all things Woofo related.
Cool.
Yeah, so that's where I can be found. How long we will maintain a Twitter presence is
to be seen. Yes.
Up in the air for all of us right now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But the map is still kind of our main thing. So liminal.earth/submit, like share your weird and interesting story with us, and we're happy to have it. And then come and hang out with us at WUFO. We are going to try and start doing, we have plans to do WUFO in different time zones, to have other folks who are willing to sort of host the live sessions.
Yeah.
And we're hoping to have that sometime starting in May.
Cool.
Until then, if you're not in Pacific Standard Time, feel free to stay up and hang out with us. 8:30 p.m. Pacific on Wednesdays. Woofo.watch. That's where we stream everything.
Yeah.
And we have a bunch of funny videos on TikTok /Liminal Earth. I think that's it.
Perfect. Great. I'll put all those links in the description so people can find you.
I still have like some Gnostic, since we were talking about it. There's a couple of Gnostic books that I have on Amazon.
Oh my God,
a foraging book as well.
Cool.
Creative Forager. It's not a plant ID book. It's a how to cook with wild plants book. So.
Oh, that's awesome.
You might like it.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm going to be ordering some more books. So.
Thank you so much for listening and or watching, depending on where you found this podcast. You can find Jeremy Puma at Mystery Harvest on Twitter. You can also find him at Liminal Earth. I'm going to put links in the description for Liminal Earth and WUFO, because those are just fun things to be a part of, and I would encourage you to engage with them. You can find Personal Pans at Personal Pans on Twitter and on Instagram. And you can find me at Kali Butterfly. That's Kali Butterfly. Yeah, hopefully this conversation inspired you to go out and explore your environment and connect with the plants that grow wherever you live. And I hope that you have a playful and curious day.